therapist Kristen Jacobson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kristen, the anxiety therapist, and today is part 2 in my Imposter Syndrome series. So in part 1, I talked about what imposter syndrome is and identified sort of the different ways that it can manifest. So today I want to talk about the origins of imposter syndrome and really understanding where that self-doubt comes from. Understanding where these feelings come from is really essential for figuring out how to deal with them. So I want to take a closer look at some of the common sources of imposter syndrome and how they shape our sense of self. Imposter syndrome is a mix of learned behavior, cognitive biases, and environmental or social influences. There isn't necessarily a single reason that people feel like frauds, but several factors tend to contribute to these feelings. So the most common causes are related to family dynamics, social comparisons, and perfectionism. So let's dive into each of these a little bit more. First is family of origin or family dynamics. So our earliest experiences with self-worth and success are often shaped by our family. So let's say you grew up in a family where achievement was highly valued, which is very common here in the US. You might have learned that your worth is tied to how much you accomplish. And so this often happens in homes where parents have very high expectations or are particularly critical. When you're constantly striving to meet their expectations, it becomes really easy to internalize the idea that nothing you do is ever good enough. On the contrary, some people grow up being praised for specific qualities, like being the smart one or the responsible one. So on the surface, this seems positive, but it can really create a lot of pressure. If you're constantly praised for being intelligent, for example, you might start to believe that any struggle or mistake means you're not living up to that label. And so then as a result, if things don't come easily, you might feel like a fraud. On the other hand, some families don't offer much recognition or support at all. And if your accomplishments were ignored or downplayed growing up, then it's really easy to develop a mindset where you feel like your successes don't count or aren't real. And this can lead to chronic feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt later in life, even when you're objectively successful and there's evidence to support that. So let me give you an example. Imagine you grew up with parents who expected you get perfect grades. So even when you got an A-, it just wasn't good enough. And now in adulthood, you might feel like any small mistake at work reflects on your overall competence. This learned pressure to be perfect can easily morph into imposter syndrome when you feel like you're never truly meeting the mark. I had this happen with one of my clients where, she was a very good student. She got good grades, but if she would bring home a 98 instead of 100, her parents would ask her what happened to those other 2 points. So that's a prime example of how this might manifest. Next, we have social comparisons. So we live in a world where comparing ourselves to others is really unavoidable, right? Especially with social media. This can happen also at work or even among friends, right? It's easy to look at others and feel like they have everything together while you're struggling behind the scenes. And this is especially true in environments where success is highly visible. So competitive workplaces or industries where reputation really matters. What makes this worse is that social comparisons are often unfair. So we tend to compare our internal struggles to other people's external successes. So if you're looking at platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram, for example, we're only seeing the polished highlights of other people's lives, not the messy behind the scene parts. But meanwhile, we're fully aware of our own challenges and setbacks and those moments of self-doubt. So this kind of creates a gap between how we see ourselves and how we assume others are doing, leading to those feelings of inferiority. Social comparisons can be especially brutal for high achievers. In environments where everyone is pushing themselves to excel, it's really easy to feel like you're the only one struggling, even though many of your peers likely feel the same way. So the more you compare yourself to others' successes, the more you feel like you're falling behind. Let me give you an example. Let's say you land a great new job and you're feeling really excited, but then you see on social media that a friend just got promoted to a C-suite role. Instead of feeling proud of your own achievement, you feel like you're not doing enough. So this constant comparison can feed into imposter syndrome by making you feel like you're never quite measuring up. And then we have perfectionism, and this is a big component. It's one of the biggest drivers of imposter syndrome because perfectionists set unrealistically high standards for themselves and then believe that anything less than flawless is a failure. It's this very all or nothing mindset. And this mindset makes it nearly impossible to feel satisfied with your accomplishments because no matter how well you do, there's always something that could have been better. The issue with perfectionism is that it really creates a no-win situation. So even when you succeed, you don't allow yourself to celebrate or sort of relish in that accomplishment because you're too focused on the areas that you feel you fell short on. Over time, this leads to a sense that you're kind of faking your success because in your mind, it's never quite good enough to be considered real. Perfectionism often stems from early experiences, whether it's being held to high standards as a child or maybe developing a fear of failure. When you're constantly trying to live up to this impossible ideal, it really reinforces the belief that you're not truly capable, which is a core aspect of imposter syndrome. So let me give you an example. Let's say you just completed a big project at work and you got really positive feedback from your boss. But instead of feeling accomplished, you're just obsessing and ruminating over that one slide in your presentation that had a grammatical error. Even though nobody else noticed, you're really stuck in this mindset that your work wasn't good enough. And then this reinforces the feeling that you're really not cut out for your role. So take a moment to reflect and just try to think about where your own imposter feelings come from. Because understanding the roots of imposter syndrome isn't just an academic exercise, it's a really powerful tool for self-awareness. And the more you can pinpoint where your feelings of self-doubt or inadequacy come from, the easier it is to challenge them. So below are a few reflection questions that can kind of get the wheels turning and help you think about how your own experiences might have contributed to these feelings. So let's start with family expectations or family of origin. 1, did your parents or family members place a lot of emphasis on achievement? 2, were you praised for certain qualities like being smart or responsible? 3, how did your family react when you made mistakes or didn't live up to their expectations? Now let's talk about social comparisons. 1, when do you find yourself comparing your success to others? 2, do you compare your struggles to others' successes, especially on social media? 3, how often do these comparisons lead you to feel like you're falling behind, even when you're doing really well? And finally, perfectionism. 1, can you think of a time when you succeeded at something or accomplished something, but you really had a hard time feeling proud because it wasn't perfect? 2, do you frequently focus on your mistakes or shortcomings rather than the overall success? And 3, how often do you hold yourself to standards that no one else expects from you or that you would never hold somebody else to? So taking the time to reflect on these questions can help you see some of the patterns in your thinking and behavior that contribute to imposter syndrome. And that's the important piece. These are patterns of thinking. It's not just a one-off moment of self-doubt. These are things that come up repeatedly. And so these insights are going to be really crucial for working through these feelings in that next stage of your journey. So knowing where your imposter syndrome comes from is really essential for overcoming it. And whether it's rooted in your family of origin, driven by social comparisons, or fueled by perfectionism, understanding this cause is really the first step towards sidestepping these feelings. So that's it for part 2. In part 3, we'll explore practical tools and strategies to overcome imposter syndrome, from changing your mindset to specific actions you can take. We'll cover how to build confidence, let go of those unrealistic standards, and finally stop feeling like a fraud. So stay tuned for next week's episode where you'll actually get some strategies to implement to help you overcome your imposter syndrome. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Anxiety Therapist, so that you're the first to know when my new content gets released.